Kto by się spodziewał, że mamy kolejne dzikie odkrycia z Elden Ring DLC, nowy film od Storma, także zobaczmy te ciekawostki. Zobaczmy, co tym razem.
What's going on, guys? With Elden Ring DLC having been out for well over a month now, it's starting to feel like the veil of mysteries has been pulled off. We've pretty thoroughly grasped all the new gameplay details, and many people's minds have switched to
Za
unraveling.
każdym razem niby to jest tak mówione, że o dobra, wiemy już wszystko i zawsze się coś znajduje. Coś, co się łączy z podstawką na bardzo nieoczywisty sposób, a jednak ma znacznie więcej sensu niż mogłoby się wydawać, nie?
The lore and the meaning behind what we played. But despite that, there are still a ton of details in this DLC that I guarantee you did not know. So today we are back at it, going through 8 new discoveries.
Ciekawe,
and
czy
you know
czegoś nie
how these
wiem.
go. If I show you something today that you didn't already know, then be sure to let me know by leaving a like on the video and subscribing if you're new around here. But with all that,
A wy zróbcie to na filmie z reakcji, moi drodzy, z YouTube'a, którzy to teraz widzą. Jeżeli czegoś nie wiedzieliście albo wiecie coś, co w filmie się nie pojawiło i chcecie się podzielić tą ciekawostką, to zostawcie komentarz koniecznie.
let's get into the first one.
Ja sobie
One of
chętnie
the most
poczytam.
formidable new enemy types in Elden Ring's DLC are the furnace golems, which serve more as environmental
Jezus
factors
Maria, jak ja nie lubię tych gigantów, stary. W sensie za pierwszym razem fajnie jest go zbić, a potem już ci się nie chce, no.
than actual mini boss fights. And they can be a real pain to bring down, having to sit there and chip away at their legs for a long time. Although there
Koksowniki.
are creative ways to break their balance.
Ej, ale materiał Heda o koksownikach to jest najlepsza rzecz, jaka wyniknęła z ich istnienia, przysięgam.
Chances are you chose not to deal with these guys. And even if you did, there is a very interesting detail that you probably missed about them. Now, when you take a look at these furnace golems, they have a little mask on their basket that is said to depict the fell god. And if you get the chance to look at this face, you will see it's expressionless with closed eyes and a closed
No tak,
mouth.
taka
But
śpiąca
did
ta
you know
twarz.
that this isn't just a mask, but the face is alive? If you
Co?
pay close attention, when you finally bring them down, you'll notice that the face has changed. You can see when they're unharmed, the face is very stoic, but after
Co
their
ty
posture
opowiadasz,
breaks,
że to jest
the eyes
żywe,
are
ten
open and the
kamień?
mouth is agape. And if you have a very keen eye, you can see the change happen in real time. As soon as the posture gets broken,
Oh,
the expression
lol.
will change. Bonfire VN has a great showcase of these expressions on their channel, where you can see this change without actually having to be in the middle of combat.
Totalnie nie
It's very
zwróciłem na to
creepy,
uwagi.
But I think it gives them that perfect level of unsettling charm to be scary even without their destructive.
Akurat jak przyglądasz się designowi tych koksowników, to one są bardzo niepokojące. Jakby tam są resztki koni, ludzi, żołnierzy, rycerzy, smoków nawet. To jest przerażająca machina.
Power. It's very on brand for From Software. When I saw Radahn as the final boss of the DLC, I got a
Ja stwierdziłem, że fajne, ale szkoda, że to nie Godwin.
big sense of deja vu. And for the obvious reason that we had already fought Radahn before, which obviously would be a cause, but there was something more there. You may have recognized a lot of the moveset from the fight in the base
Dokładnie.
game, but if you're an OG of From Software games, there's a chance you might have
Ty, ale jak ludzie mówili, że ten Radahn jest zupełnie inny i co ja pieprzę, że jakkolwiek jest podobny, to nie wiem. Halo, przecież tu są nawet te same ruchy momentami. Specjalnie tak pierwsza faza zrobiona, żebyś miał takie déjà vu.
recognized that we got a taste of this all the way back in Dark Souls 2. And that's
Co?
because people noticed that much of Radahn's moveset comes from Vengarl in Dark Souls 2. Now you can very easily notice that Vengarl's body uses the same kind of weapon as Radahn. So From Software had a very good blueprint here to reuse some of these combos, and you'll notice
Co ty
throughout the fight
opowiadasz?
that many of them do overlap. There's that signature double slash move followed by the cross that you'll see at the end even catches the player from a bit of
To
range,
dlatego
just
tak
like
ludzi
it does
wkurza
in the final
pewnie.
boss fight of the DLC. And if you think the Radahn fight is jank, well, you may have Dark Souls 2 hitboxes to blame. Now, of course, the combos aren't exactly one
Ale
to
akurat, wiecie, żarty żartami z tym Dark Souls 2 najgorszą grą, ale jest dużo rzeczy, w Eldenie zwłaszcza, które faktycznie z Dark Souls 2 czerpią. Jest naprawdę sporo takich rzeczy. Jasne, można powiedzieć o power stancingu, ale nawet powiedziałbym, że ten smoczy szczyt w Dark Souls 2 jest swego rodzaju prekursorem do powstania Fary Azula. Jakby jest trochę zbieżnych. Jest.
And Radahn does, of course, have a much more expansive moveset than Vengarl, but the ideas are there. And I do think it's fair to say that they probably used Vengarl as the framework. He honestly might have been
DS2 nie powinno powstać, a moim zdaniem powinno, bo dzięki niemu zostały wyciągnięte wnioski.
even more of a basis for Radahn than just the moves, being this berserker lion warrior of Ferosa. And just like Radahn lost his mind to the Scarlet Rot and his body kept fighting on, Vengarl's body kept fighting on due to its warrior spirit, even
Jezus,
after his
to nawet
head was
lorowo
cut off.
podobne
So
jest.
the more I think about it, it's a perfect overlap. And I think From Software absolutely used Vengarl in their inspiration for Radahn. An interesting mechanic in Elden Ring's base game that a lot of people didn't know about were feints, an alternate attack that becomes available when you press the dodge button while charging a heavy attack. As seen on the scimitar here, instead of doing the double slash, the feint does a quick slash and then a backflip. Feint attacks were available on 3 types
Ja tego nawet nie wiem. Jak to?
of weapons, those being curved swords, thrusting swords, and heavy thrusting swords.
Co?
Now, while this move isn't super useful in PvE, it allows for some very interesting situations to happen in PvP, with being able to
Możesz przerywać combo ze specjalną animacją odskoku na niektórych broniach? Od kiedy?
trick your opponent, since a feint begins as the telegraph for a heavy charge attack. But did you know that with the DLC, they introduced a new type of weapon that also has feints, those being the great katanas.
Ale
You can see that the feint
zarąbiste.
here changes the heavy jab into a
To wydaje się mega dobre na NPC-owych przeciwników. Mega dobre.
backstep with a slash. Even the regular great katanas get its slashes changed to the backstep one. Now I've literally been using the great katanas exclusively since the DLC dropped, and I had no idea they had feints. Now you guys have heard me go off about how good Rakshasa's katana is and how it's my favorite weapon. Well, now it's even better. So I am very happy to learn this, and I'm curious how many of you knew about this as well. Now, I'm not gonna lie, I'm pretty mad at myself for not knowing about this. One part of the Shadow Keep that I always found very interesting was the bridge where we can find these basins with this
Shadowkeep to jest tak dowalona lokacja, naprawdę. Jest rewelacyjna, a same w sobie archiwa to jedna z moich ulubionych lokacji w Soulsach kiedykolwiek, nie żartuję.
golden fire burning upwards. And I wondered what the significance of this was,
Donżon
but I
cienia,
never took a really
powaga.
close look at these. Not until it was pointed out to me that these aren't basins at all. They're boats. More specifically, they're the boats of the Tibia Mariners, the ghostly sailors that
kurde.
guide those
Nie
lost
wiedziałem,
in
że to
death
te.
to the afterlife. And it's obvious now, looking at them, they are exactly the same, just
No.
missing the inner contents. But what's the takeaway here? What is
Spoko,
the
wiesz, lorowy sens to pewnie ma, a co powiedzą specjaliści, szefowie, ludolodzy? No, zreusowany asset, widać, że na szybko zrobione gówno.
the lore significance of this? Well, we can find in many spots throughout the Land of Shadow remnants of the old death traditions, where the dead were once burned in ghost flame under the worship of the Twin Bird. And we learn about this concept of the Helfen, a black church where those who died in battle would seek out in order to pass on. And oddly
To, co nie ma zbytnio sensu, mimo że ma lorowy sens to gameplayowo, to ci sentinele powtórzeni obrzydliwi. Tak się wkurzyłem na to.
enough, the church district of the Shadow Keep sure looks like it could fit this description. We can look at the depiction of the church on the Helfen steeple and find this same 3-window motif. But what does this actually mean? Personally, the interpretation I've picked up on is that after Marika's conquest, these ways of the old world were repurposed under her design. I don't think this is literally the Helfen, perhaps another depiction just the way the Helfen steeple is, but whatever purpose these boats or location used to serve has now been fashioned under the Order of Gold, which is likely what we see with the golden grace coming out of the ashes. As for their exact purpose or mechanics, what do you think these boats are doing now, in the state we find them in the current game? Rellana's lore in the DLC tells us that she was once a Carian princess, the sister of Rellana, and an heir to the Carian throne. But
Ty, Rennala to takie gówno w porównaniu do siostry z DLC-ka. Znaczy ona zawsze była średnia, ale teraz to już w ogóle.
she forsook that birthright in order to follow Mesmer, leaving to aid him in his subjugation of the Land of Shadow.
No,
And we
Renna
see
ma
this
fajną.
dichotomy visualized in her use of magic and flame, combining the two elements in her weapons. But despite her devotion, we don't really see much reciprocation from Mesmer, at least in a direct format. But did you ever take a close look at her weapons? And I mean a really close look.
Nie.
Because when her remembrance describes her as the sword of Mesmer, that may be very literal. If you look at the guard of the
O
fire
kurde.
sword that she wields, you'll notice a decoration of a two-headed snake.
Ale fajny
It's
szczegół.
almost impossible to see without camera tools, but right there on the hilt, it's very apparent. So is this sword the one symbol of respect from Mesmer to Rellana? I think it very well could be, perhaps given to her when she took on the role of the Sword of Mesmer. So that's a very cool detail that is normally never going to be seen, but it just shows you the level of storytelling that From Software goes to. So for all you guys that play through Elden Ring in co-op, let me ask you something. When you played the DLC and got to the final boss, did this happen to you?
Co się stało? Ha? A, wiem. On zginie, nie? Od razu. Te. Było coś takiego i ponoć z samonami ogólnie nawet też to było. Był bug, ale naprawili to chyba już. Łatwy bossik, co? Nie wiem, czemu ludzie się tak męczą.
So that is not a joke. That is not a mod, that is not a cheat. If you summon 2 cooperators for the fight against Leda and her allies and they live, then when you continue through the area and go up the steps towards the Divine Gate, Radahn will literally just die. I have absolutely no idea why this works or how it works,
Dalej
but several
działa?
of you guys reached out to me and said that it happened to you as well. And as
O
far as the
kuźwa.
patch notes go, this has not been addressed.
Aha,
Now, obviously,
myślałem, że to
this
jest
is a
załatane
glitch,
już.
not supposed to happen whatsoever, but I
No
like
to
to
jak
think
ktoś
that
nie
Radahn...
radzi sobie z Radanem i ma go na tyle dosyć, że po prostu chce skończyć DLC-ka, to może zrobić tak. Nie polecam, fajnie jest się zmierzyć, ale można.
On is just scared of gank squads. And as an invader, I get it. There is nothing worse. But regardless, I hope this does eventually get patched, because it does rob you out
Radan
of
po
the
prostu ma tak. Ale p***a do mnie idzie, dobra, wychodzę.
experience, even if that experience is pretty brutal. Every now and then when Elden Ring gets patched, there are a lot of changes that happen behind the scenes that aren't listed in the patch notes. And when patch 1.13 dropped, there were a ton, and we still haven't figured out the majority of changes that actually happened. But one of the ones that was quickly
Krzesło.
noticed was that they added a chair
Tak.
to Rellana's boss room, and we've talked about that before. However, there was another change recently that changes our understanding of a character quite a bit.
Coś
That
tu się
being the
zmieniło?
Hornsent Grandam. And the patch actually changed the description of the Watchful Spirit
O!
incantation, and it actually only changed one word.
A to jest bardzo ciekawe, że wcześniej było Empyrean słowo, które jest używane jako ci, którzy mogą dostąpić boskości, jak Mikela czy choćby Rani, tak?
To where before the patch, the spell referred to the Grandam as the Empyrean Grandam. But
No
after the patch,
właśnie.
it just calls her the Hornsent Grandam, just like her map marker. Now, I actually do agree with this change. I thought the reference as the Empyrean Grandam was pretty weird. We have to do
To
a bit...
mogło być po prostu misleading. Może oni nie chcieli w taki sposób tego nazwać, a angielskie tłumaczenie zepsuło to, nie? Bo jednak niebianin to jest bardzo ważna postać w lore Eldena, więc używanie tego tako to nie jest zbyt dobry pomysł.
bit of gymnastics to figure out why exactly that word Empyrean is used, but now it simplifies things, and it's not another wrench in the lore. But what do you think? Are you happy with this change? Or would you have liked for them to keep referencing her as Empyrean? The one thing that really caught my eye when I finally reached Inir at the end of Shadow of the Erd Tree
Jezu,
was
jakie to jest
all of
ładne
the
miejsce.
spiral imagery, with the very tower itself being a spiral, and that spiral being the path to divinity. But the shape, the color, and the overall aesthetic of the area made me think immediately of the Godslayer Greatsword, the chosen weapon of the Gloam-Eyed Queen
W
who led
sumie,
the
coś w tym
Godskin
jest.
hunt. And the similarities here really can't be denied. I mean, it looks like it was ripped straight out of Inir with all of the same motifs, and the only thing we have to ask is why. Well, one interesting theory that I've considered even before the DLC came out was that this was the site of the Godskin hunt. And that's because of the story trailer. Because in that trailer, it depicts the Gate of Divinity as full of these freshly skinned corpses. And not to mention that the Godskin hunt as a whole is an event entirely erased from history. There's no record of it in the lands between, and if it took place in the Land of Shadow, then that would make a lot of sense. And not to mention the obvious nod in the story trailer where we see that gloaming purple sky off to the left. I think the hints here are pretty clear. But of course that would mean that the Gloam-Eyed Queen was working with Marika in her conquest, and the gods that were killed were the Hornsent Tower folk. Now the problem is that there is nothing in the DLC that even remotely hints at this, or touches on the
Wydaje mi
Gloam-Eyed
się, że Miyazaki zostawił wyjątkowo dużo dziur fabularnych w tym DLC i to celowo. Cholera jasna, tu tyle można nie wiem, jest tyle historii, które chciałbym zobaczyć, żeby się jeszcze rozwinęły. Tu jest dosłownie taki ładunek lorowy jeszcze do rozwinięcia, czy właśnie z Gloam-Eyed Queen, czy z Godwinem, że jasne, możemy uznać, że brak informacji jest w zasadzie odpowiedzią na ich temat i zakończeniem ich historii, ale z tego mogłoby się uzbierać na Eldena II, naprawdę.
Queen or the Godskin hunt in any capacity.
Na spin-off,
The
prequel,
reality is
cokolwiek.
the only Godskins we find are in the lands between. So maybe this is all circumstantial evidence, but I think all the similarities between the Godslayer Greatsword and Inir are a bit too close to be coincidence. So I'd like you guys to leave your thoughts down in the comments below. Why do you think the similarities are so strong here? Or do you think it's just a result of Elden Ring symbolism and not meant to be taken so deep? But those are 8 new things that you probably didn't know
Fajne,
about Elden Ring
kurczę.
DLC. I hope I showed you something new
Nie,
today.
rozwaliło mnie w ogóle z tym nowym movesetem. Ja nie miałem pojęcia i kurde to, że w ogóle Radahn ma ruchy typa z Dark Souls 2 to też jest ciekawe. A propos Dark Souls 2 będziemy ogrywać we wrześniu. Możliwe, że nawet z modem poprawiającym oświetlenie, sprawiającym, że Dark Souls 2 wygląda prześlicznie, także będzie grane i będzie to Dark Souls 2 na pierwszym levelu, a być może na minus 44, bo jest to możliwe. Napiszcie w komentarzach na YouTubie, widzowie, czy dowiedzieliście się czegoś nowego, bo ja zdecydowanie nie wiedziałem, że można się wycofać podczas kombosa z niektórymi brońmi. Jest to specjalny odskok.